Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody, on behalf of the Holocaust Museum LA. My name is Michael Morgenstern, and I'm an educator at the museum. And this afternoon, you have the honor and privilege of listening to Monika White and Gitta Morris share their story with you. And afterwards, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. Before we begin, I would like to share a quick history of our museum. Holocaust Museum LA was founded in the early 1960s by a group of Holocaust survivors who wanted to make sure that future generations would always remember and learn from this tragic history. And they did this at a time in the early 1960s when most people were not yet ready to learn about the Holocaust. But thanks to their courage and foresight, they created what became the first and oldest Holocaust museum in the United States, always with a mission to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations. We can't do the work that we do today without our survivor community who still on a regular basis shares their stories with groups to make sure that you as the future generations can always learn and carry forward this history. Today, you have the honor and privilege of learning from Gitta Morris and Monika White, who will share their family's story with you, and you'll be able to ask questions at the end. And this talk is also in conjunction with our temporary exhibit, Hidden History, Recounting the Shanghai Jewish Story, which is on display at the museum through August 28th. So if you have not seen this exhibit yet at the museum, please look on our website and you can see how to book a ticket and come to see our exhibit and learn more about the Shanghai Jewish story. Gitta and Monika, thank you both so much for joining us today and for being with us and sharing your story. We're so grateful to have you with us today, and thank you everybody for tuning in, and you may begin sharing your story. You are muted.
Thank you, Michael, for having us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So let us start. We get our it worked before. Here we go. We go into the slideshow, and there we are. Okay. So our Shanghai story is really from our perspective as children. And we want to say that because we were born there in 1939. And a lot of what we went through before and during and after the war, we were kids. We were 8 years old when we came to the United States. Since then, of course, we have learned a lot and learned to understand a lot more of what was going on there. And a lot of our story has been put together piece by piece by talking with people, by reading over the years, kind of a combination of searching for answers and hearing other people's stories. So it's really a combination of what we remember as kids, yes, and then what we learned a lot later. We'd also like to share with you a little about our lives after Shanghai, after we came to the United States, and what our lives have been like growing up and growing older, and where we are now. So we'd like to start with that.
So although we started our life in Shanghai as refugees, our story really begins in Germany in the our dad, Eric Bayer, was born in 1900 in Germany, and our mother, Estera, born in Poland in 1913. German and Polish Jews who were fortunate enough to leave Germany just in the nick of time. Our dad was raised in Northeast Germany. He even served in the First World War, and the German Navy mustered out in 1919, and he moved to Berlin. And shortly after our mother's birth, her father was literally deported from Poland as a political dissident and moved to Berlin. And shortly thereafter, his family followed him to Berlin. And so there they both lived.
So in 1938, this is what the bustling town of Berlin looked like, but it was very much already a perilous time for the Jews. Hitler had started picking up Jews who were identified in one way or another since 1933. And what was happening is people just disappeared off the street or from their work. And this is what happened to our dad, who wasn't anybody in particular, not an important person, but he disappeared. He and our mom were engaged to be married, but had not yet married. And he spent several months in Buchenwald. At that time, if you could find your person where they were, because nobody told you they're in Buchenwald or wherever they went, where they were taken, you were able to get them out because part of what they did was allow deportation. So you had to show proof of passage that you could get the two families got together, found our dad, and put their money together and had passage to what was at the time the only place to go, which we'll get to for a minute. Would like to say that in both of our families, they tried very hard, our parents tried very hard to get everybody to leave at that time in 1938, and people were still not believing what was happening and felt that it would be okay to stay. As a result, they were the only survivors in both families, and except for one of Daddy's sisters.
He had
an aunt, who married an Eastern German soldier and survived that way, but died shortly after the war. So our parents were able to go to Shanghai, where there was a slow trickle through the late 30s of Jewish people from all over Europe. This is what it looked like in January 27th, 1939, when our
parents arrived in Shanghai. That's what Shanghai looked like. It was at the time
already occupied
British, by the Russians, by Japanese, Americans, divided into different sections throughout basically this area.
Yeah, and they decided, the four countries, along with China, that they would leave their port open. So it was totally open, and that is why the Jews were able to go to Shanghai because anybody in the world could go there. While the ships of Jewish refugees who were fleeing, were turned away from every other country in the world that year. Quotas were filled, they were literally turned away, but they were able to go to Shanghai, papers or not, with or without papers. And that's why, and that's how our parents landed in Shanghai after.
And by 1941, when World War II actually started, there were about 20,000 plus Jewish refugees living in this area.
And what happened was that they congregated in an area which became known as the Shanghai Ghetto or the Shanghai Jewish Ghetto. It was a neighborhood with very low income Chinese people. That's where they were, and somehow that's how the Jews landed in that ghetto, because there were other Jewish people already living there.
And it was also known as the Hangqiu Ghetto.
Hangqiu, and that's an area that's actually still there. Japanese had already occupied Shanghai. There were a lot of Japanese there, and the refugees faced this, what Hangqiu, parts of Hangqiu, not all, but there was already quite a bit of devastation and chaos in that neighborhood.
Now these pictures, these are scenes that we remember to this day as children, seeing the rickshaws, the people living on the streets and so on. And so these are our memories.
Big buildings.
Buildings like that.
Yeah.
That's what we remember of Shanghai.
Well, I got ahead. But things were difficult for the refugees. While China welcomed anybody and welcomed the refugees, they didn't feed them or house them or take care of them. And so much of Hangqiu looked like this. It was especially hard for single men. You can see that they lived sometimes 10 of them in a room, but it was very crowded and not easy. They had to find their way, and this is again in the late 30s and before the war. And it was in this. Oh no, sorry, getting away. There we go. I'm trying to show you that this is the sort of the context into which we were born. December 1939. That's Gitta there. I don't know which way the picture is. I'm the one that's looking off into space. So with my feet.
We were one of two sets of twins born during the 10 years of those 10 years, 39 to 49. Out of how many children that were born?
About 300 over the 10 years that
were born there, but only two sets of
twins. And we once went to a reunion in Toronto of Shanghai Jews, and we met the daughter of a doctor who showed us a picture holding two sets of twins, and one of those twins had to have been us. But anyway,
so she said.
So she said. So,
well, our employment, of course, was very difficult, and everybody had to try to support their own family. This is our dad, who was fortunate enough to be employed here and there. He worked in a water purification plant, and then eventually worked for CARE, which was fortunate for us because we were able to secure more food than some people during that time.
Yeah, that he was able to bring some food home.
Food from them.
So you should know that while we weren't in Europe, where there were bombings every day and people getting shot on the street and the horror that was going on there, we did know hunger. We did know fear as the war progressed. And this is a picture that Gitta and I remember this very well. This was after the war was officially declared in 1941, and we remember the Japanese coming into the ghetto like this. And basically what they did, they took us out of wherever we were living, and we were in a one-room flat or apartment. And we always lived in one room before and after the war. So there were two of us and our mother and dad, and they took us out of that and kind of herded us together. And we were put into a room with 4 other families. So we spent the war in a kind of an internment situation. We called it camp. We called it a camp, but it may or may not have been, but there was a wall, there was an entrance. People had to get permission to come in and out of that area just to go to work if they could. And we
went to school.
And we went to school.
In and out of the walled area.
Right. We'll talk a little bit more about school. For us, it was kind of the beginning of a sad situation in that during camp, we were now 5 years old. During camp, our mother just disappeared. We don't know how else to say that. She just wasn't there one day
anymore.
What happened was that they split up or divorced or separated or something, but we didn't know that, and we didn't, of course, understand that. All we knew is that she was gone.
And we were with our dad.
We were with our dad and spent the rest of the war, just the 3 of us. He never was willing to talk about her to the day he died. But he never spoke of her and didn't want to hear anything about her. They did divorce eventually, and they both remarried. This was after the war.
Well,
years later, we found out that our mother also remarried and later had a daughter, Dorothy, who we eventually left. We left Shanghai after the war with our stepmother and her daughter from a former marriage. So there were now 3 of us kids. Our stepsister was 1 year younger than we were, and we left in
1948.
1948.
We came to America.
Yeah, but of course we didn't know about a lot of this until much later.
And, you know, although things were difficult, the Jewish community felt strongly about education. And so we always went to school, as did all the other kids. And there we are in our kindergarten class, which we enjoyed and loved going to. And
in fact, remember, we were always hoping that Daddy would marry our kindergarten
teacher. We wished. We liked her so much, and she was so good to us. So
the refugees before the war began really made a community for themselves. There was a cafe, there was a synagogue, there were shops, and of course all of that stopped once the war began. But for us, school was everything. We loved school. We did well. People liked us. And we show this picture because boys and girls were separated
in classes.
Yeah. And I guess we had some musical talent as kids, but I think it's mostly because we were twins.
Yeah.
Twins are always cute, and they dressed us up and they taught us songs in other languages phonetically. Right here, we learned Anchors Away
in English.
in English, although we had no idea. We spoke only German, by the way. And
We also
we
did
did
some
Russian. Yeah, we did Russian. I think Spanish. Anyway, so we weren't particularly singers or dancers, but that's what we did, and we enjoyed doing that, of course. One of our friends, Sonia Muehlberger, there with her brother Peter, was born in the same year as we were, and years and years later, we found each other on the internet and have reconnected. Turns out that she has been searching for us for years and years, and it just took a really, really long time to find each other. I want to especially mention Sonia because she was instrumental in helping the Shanghai Jewish Refugee Museum, which I think opened in 2007, or built and then. She helped identify and locate something like 19,000 Jewish refugees from the ghetto around the world. She appears in many of the videos and the stories about Shanghai. So we've been in touch with each other for quite a while. This next picture we're just showing you because it's our favorite picture of ourselves.
Probably we were 7, maybe 8. This probably was
We
close to
can't
the
tell.
time.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
we
Maybe
don't know.
We don't know how old we were there or what
Yeah.
year that was, but as you can see, in spite of difficulties, and I can't stress enough how difficult it was in the camp, because during the war, air raid sirens would go off, and we were taught to, if we heard the sirens and we were home, ran and opened all the windows that we
Which opened out.
so the buildings wouldn't implode if there was a bomb. And then we just huddled in the hallway until there was all clear. And like I said, we were hungry sometimes, and of course, then we missed our mother. And it was a very...
And there was a time of bombings and bodies on the streets that we walked over on our way to school, and soldiers and people who were injured were brought into the camp, as a matter of fact, because there was a medical facility at the back. And some of what we did was sit at our window and watch this play out, watch this happen. So,
but our point is that we always seem to be cheerful kids. We don't know why, but we have never thought that our mother abandoned us. We always believed that something happened. We don't know what, we didn't know what. We could not get answers. Eventually we got some, but it was just, I don't know, we don't know. We think because we had each other, we were able to smile. We were our best support in the fact that our teachers liked us, other students liked us, other people liked us. I think we had a kind of a balance that enabled us to continue to develop a kind of a positive outlook.
So eventually, as we got ready to come to America after the war, this was 1948, an international relocation organization, the JDC, and in some years later, HIAS, helped the refugees to leave.
But the war was over in 1945.
Right. So this was 3 years later. That's right. In this paper, if you can read it, it tells you that the former German government is now defunct. And so we were literally those displaced persons with no government and no country.
And they called
Called
us
us
stateless.
Stateless as well. We were the DPs. Mhm.
Yeah, we were. And this is the paper that we traveled with to the United States. And because we were in China, we crossed the Pacific and came to San Francisco. 3 horrendous weeks on the ocean with hundreds and hundreds of refugees, bananas, and soldiers. Almost everybody was sick, and there were terrible conditions on the ship. It's a trip we will certainly never forget. However, we had an interesting experience
Yes,
on the
yes.
ship.
Monica and I decided to wander a little bit and explore the ship. And as we did, we happened to see a door that was open a little bit, and we, of course,
Peeked in.
being adventurous. And there were a whole bunch of soldiers or sailors there, a whole room full. And what we later discovered was a movie screen. And the movie that was showing was full of music and dancing. And many years later, we discovered that that was a Danny Kaye movie. Some of you may remember that, but we will always remember.
We'll always remember because we'd never seen a movie
Or anything
before
like it.
or anything like it. We had no idea what we were looking
seeing.
at. We didn't know anything about movies, and that was really quite a thrill to see. We arrived in San Francisco, where we stayed for, I don't know, about 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And while JDC and others of the relocation services were looking across the United States for a home with everything in it, dishes, furniture, linens, because we came literally, each of us with a small suitcase, and I believe $12 we found out in American money. A job for the head of household, and a school that would take children that didn't speak English. Now, wherever those 3 things come together, that's where you were sent. And I mean sent, that's what you didn't have a choice about that. And we ended up in, of all places, Duluth, Minnesota, one of the coldest places in the United States, kind of a shock, but truly we were very excited. We traveled back to Hongkou, both of us, in the very alley where we lived, and I don't know if you can see, this is our door. That was actually our 1-room door where we lived after the war. And you know what? The first time we went back there, it was just the same.
It was exactly the same.
Yeah. We met some of the neighbors when we visited Gitta in 1987 and I in 1989. And they were so welcoming, right?
They really were. Well, at first, they couldn't quite figure out what we were doing there. We showed up in 1987, my husband and I, with a piece of paper, which was actually our exit paper from Shanghai in 1948, but they couldn't understand what we were saying. I was trying to tell them that we used to live right here. Eventually, they sent for this young woman who's standing next to me, and she's an English teacher in the neighborhood. They sent for her, and then she explained, and they brought the neighborhood out to see us, as they did when Monika.
Same when her husband, Roger and I went, same thing. And we had a Polaroid camera with us, and we're taking pictures. And it was a wonderful experience. And there was an elderly gentleman there who came out and said, Finkelstein, Rosenberg, he listed a whole bunch of Jewish sounding names. He was there during the war, and he remembered the refugees. We also traveled in 2015, not so long ago, and reunited with our friend Sonia and her brother Peter, and spent an amazing day together in person. We had been in touch online, and we tried to replicate the picture from so many. There's 69-year difference between these two pictures, yeah. But it was very, very exciting. And might I add that Peter had a little trouble getting up from this position. Just wanted to show you, down below was the synagogue in Hongqiu in the 1940s, and that building has been repurposed and redeveloped, and is now the Shanghai Jewish Refugee Museum in the Hongqiu district. Today, and the last time that we were in Shanghai, my husband and I, we visited the museum and contributed some papers and pictures. There's almost nothing left of the ghetto. It's office buildings and restaurants and so forth. But the museum is there, and is a really beautiful place if you ever get a chance to visit. We'd like to talk a little bit more now about our mother, who we did reunite with eventually. She left camp, as we said, when we were 5. We didn't know what happened to her. And again, our father refused to speak of her at all. When we were in our middle 20s, we decided to look for her. And with the help of the Council of Jewish Women here in Los Angeles, we actually found her. They found her. It took us, what, 4.5 years? Yeah, yes. 4.5, 5 years to actually locate her. She was in Israel with her husband, Horst, and her daughter,
Dorothy, who is 7 years younger than we are.
We are. We brought her to Minnesota for a first meeting, and you can only imagine what that was like all the way.
It was traumatic in a lot of ways, and fantastic. And she had grandchildren she didn't know anything about, so it was quite amazing.
But it turns out that she actually knew a lot about us. She knew when we graduated high school. She knew when we got married, because she was in touch with a lot of refugees who were also in the same area that we were. But our father actually kept that secret from us.
Never told us.
Yeah. In fact, my sister once saw a packet of letters that you really thought those were from Enoch.
I did. Yeah. I believe they were from our mother. He held them away from me where I couldn't really see them, but I could have sworn they came from Germany. And so at first, when the council was helping us, they did look for her in Germany. And it was actually, to our understanding, there that a man eventually, after some years, said, "No, I think I know this woman, and she doesn't live here. She lives in Israel." And that's when they started looking for her in Israel.
And yeah, but one of the interesting things was that her husband, Horst, is from Munich. And in 1972, he was originally from Munich. In 1972, when the Olympics were held in Munich, he, through his job, he worked for a hotel chain, was asked to go to Munich and help out during the Olympics. Well, he told us one day that the minute he touched the ground in Munich, he felt like he was at home. And he literally called our mother in Israel and said, "I'm home. I want to stay here. And he did. And he kind of said to her, it's up to you. I'd like you to come, but if you want to stay in Israel, I will understand. And she did eventually follow. So we visited back and forth really until she died in 1992. He died in 89. But here's, for us, an amazing picture. We visited in Munich in 1984. We were 44 years old, and we met Dorothy in person for the first time. This is the only picture we have of the five of us, so we really treasure this picture. We are, of course, in touch with Dorothy,
who, by the way, never left Israel. She stayed there. She went to school there. She married there. She had a son, and
now she has grandchildren, and she lives in Ramadan, right outside of Tel Aviv. This is I think, the last picture of Ima and Horst in Munich. That's in front of the place where they lived. And unfortunately, our mother had developed Alzheimer's, and eventually we had to put her in a facility. Horst moved with her into the independent unit, and so they were together. He would pick her up for meals, and until he died in 89. And by that time, she was in a very advanced state of Alzheimer's, and then died in 1992. We've continued contact with Dorothy, and we went in 2004 to her son's wedding, and then we were just there 3 months ago.
That's
right.
May.
We had a wonderful visit, and while we were there, her third grandson was born. She has two granddaughters. We had a great time. We spent about a week with her. And here's our Israel family in May. Gitta's taking the picture.
I'm taking the picture.
She's not in here. And Micha, our Dorothy's husband, our brother-in-law, we were so happy to have had this time, because unfortunately, about 6 weeks later, he passed away. He was quite ill when we were there, but he spent the whole week socializing with us as much as possible. And there's Dorothy's son and his the three grandchildren.
Her three grandchildren. Yes.
Yeah. So that's okay. So back to our time in Minnesota. We and a number of other refugees landed in Duluth, and they actually, as you see, in May 8th, 1948, there was an article about the refugees who not only arrived in Duluth, but met each other, because there were a number of us, and there's a number of names here of families. So this was in the papers. So this is our arrival in Duluth. There we are with our stepsister in the middle, and our stepmother. You want to talk a little bit about when we
arrived in Duluth and were taken to the place where we were going to live? We were absolutely astounded at how luxurious the place was, even though we later found out it wasn't in the best neighborhood or the best area. But to us, it might as well have been a castle. We had a five-room apartment. We had our own bathroom. We had a refrigerator, an ice box. Back in those days, it was completely furnished. They had food. They had everything you could possibly think, including toys for us. And the three of us girls had our own bedroom. It was
and a radio, which we had never seen,
and which we played to death.
Yeah, okay. And when we first saw it and somebody turned it on, we ran around to the back to see how could those people be in that that little box. That's kind of the state that we were in,
Yeah.
but we were just in heaven. I'm
Yeah.
not sure how happy Daddy and
Yeah,
how happy they were with
but-
everything, but for us it
Yeah.
was spectacular because we had never lived in more than one room. It was amazing.
And we started school, and at first the other kids all laughed at us. We couldn't speak English. We looked different. But eventually we all became friends.
Please note, even in this picture, our stepmother used to literally cut our hair with a bowl on our head. That's how she cut our hair. And we had only hand-me-down clothes, which I think we were fortunate to get, but we were aware
Yeah.
of that.
Unfortunately, our life with our stepmother was very difficult. She didn't really like the two of us, favored her daughter, was very blatant about it, and was very abusive physically and emotionally and mentally to us until we both left home at 17, right after we graduated.
And, just as an adult and looking back at that period of time, those 10 years that we spent with her, we were older now. In some ways, we were more aware of the difficulties we experienced with her, less aware in Shanghai,
That's right.
of the ongoing difficulties. It was a tough time for us. But again, we had school where we did really well. We were liked. We had friends only at school. We were not allowed to.
We were thrilled to go to school
We
every
loved
day
school.
because we were not at home. It made a big
Any
difference
place
to
but
us.
home. We did move to Minneapolis in '52. Our dad thought there would be more opportunities for us there. So in 1952, we moved to Minneapolis. We attended vocational high school. They said to us, nobody's ever going to take care of you, so you have to learn a trade. You have to learn to do something with your hands and be able to take care of yourself. So we were licensed, we were in high school and licensed cosmetologists at age 16.
That's right.
We completed high school by going to school in the morning and then working full-time
An
job
8-hour job
at beauty,
every day.
at a beauty shop.
Mhm.
And so, we that was fine. That was really fine. So Gitta
Yeah.
married shortly.
right out of high school, about 6 months after graduation. I married my high school sweetheart. I had kids. Here we are. Here's some of the pictures
Over the years.
over the years, the 70s and the 80s. And eventually I also raised, that marriage ended and I married again. I eventually raised a stepson as well. So I have 5 children, even though there's only 4 in these pictures.
Yeah, that was a little later.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I ran away from Minnesota. I ran away to California, been here since 1958. I worked as a hairdresser, I worked as a secretary, and eventually in my middle 20s, I fulfilled one of my lifelong dreams, which was to go to college and become a teacher. That was always what I wanted to do, and which I did. Over the course of many years, worked my way through college and then received scholarships so that I went from an AA at junior college to a BA at Cal State LA to an MSW, Master's in Social Work, on a full scholarship at USC, and then eventually to a PhD at USC. So I had a little bit of a different life than my sister, who just continued to grow our family and realized how important this family is to us. who lost everybody, who never had grandparents or aunts or uncles or cousins.
Or anybody.
Uh,
Now we have 5 children, 12 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren, with many more to come, because 6 of my 12 grandchildren are married. So we have hopes for many, many more children.
So we think of ourselves as Gitta's job was to grow us a family, and I did the education, the academic work. So while Gitta was busy doing her part, I just kept going to school. And I, by the way, I worked my way through my bachelor's degree doing hair, so I was actually glad to have that. I was very fortunate to have worked in gerontology and aging, and worked with some very famous people in the field, and became a little bit famous myself. Traveled, I consulted, I lectured, I worked. I've been to Japan, Hong Kong, Australia, Alaska, all over the United States, all over the UK. I was able to do a lot of leadership work with national and local and state associations and groups, and eventually landed at the Center for Healthy Aging in Santa Monica, and that's where, from there is where I retired. Ran that nonprofit for a number of years, retired in 2009, and continued teaching at USC in both social work and gerontology until 2015. I've been recognized here and there, and I think in 2020 really was honored by being inducted into the Social Welfare Hall of Distinction. So, I've had a wonderful career. I continue to work on boards as a volunteer, including for JFS and the Holocaust program. And then Gitta.
In the meantime, I always worked. I worked as a hairdresser for years while raising my children. And in 1977, after several of my kids were in college in Minnesota, I picked up my youngest ones and moved to California to be with my sister. And I worked for more than 18 years at USC in the in the Gerontology Center as the executive assistant to the dean. And then the last 10 years of working, I was at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. And there again, I was the executive assistant to the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry, a wonderful and rewarding work. I loved it there, but I retired in 2014. So since then.
So there have been our careers and our life in Minnesota, our life in Shanghai and in California as we pursued our careers. And then all of a sudden, kind of out of nowhere in our middle 30s, we discovered music. Mm-hmm. And we had met some people who played this kind of traditional American country and mountain kind of Appalachian style music. And we were both encouraged to take up some instruments. I think you can see there on the wall, we consider them art. And before we knew it, we had a band. Gitta and I had a band with 5 women. And for 10 years, not full time because we both had to work. Yeah. We performed amazingly with this band, quite successfully. Here's a few pictures. We made our first, we made 2 albums. We performed in many places, Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm, Magic Mountain, all the theme parks, all the bluegrass festivals. We did farmers markets. We played a lot for jam. We just played in jams, playing with other people as much as possible. Music kind of took over our lives for about 10 years, although, as I said, we continued to work. I have a vivid memory of being in the dressing room at Disney.
Disney.
Remember, I was
Mhm.
doing
Yeah.
my data for my dissertation, for my PhD dissertation with for those of you who remember those green and white striped data sheets. So all of that was going on. So here's our two albums. We used to travel a lot. That's my husband. The three of us have traveled, and believe me, it's very popular to go on a bluegrass cruise. This is one of the cruises. There were 200 banjo players.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Right there. Oy vavoy.
Oy vavoy is right. So today we still play some. Roger and my sister and I, we sometimes perform Roger in the bookends, or somebody else will join us, and we go by the good old time string band. We don't do a lot of that. Usually when we're asked, we do play for nursing homes, assisted living, a lot of nonprofit events, people's birthdays and so forth. And we travel to go to festivals and jam. Most of it's a hobby now. So just want to say that we've had full lives. We both have marriages that are going strong after more than 45 years. We're both retired. We have our music. We continue our lifelong hobby of knitting and crocheting and weaving, sometimes making items for charities. I continue to volunteer on several nonprofit boards, and I've been a Rotary Club member for the last 27 years. Gitta travels back to Minnesota to see her kids and her grandkids, great grandkids as much as possible. So in spite of the difficulties of the war, other family losses, some tough years finding our way, we're very grateful for our lives, our health, our family, and to all those who have encouraged us over the years. We're thankful to our husbands, to each other, for the love and support of our efforts to find the strength, not only to survive, but to thrive. Here we are over the years, and we thank you very much for joining us to hear our story, and we are available to answer any questions.
And we are, as of this day, 82 and a half years old.
82 and a half, good Lord. Thank you so much.
For
Thank you.
to us.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us this afternoon. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box. And those watching on Facebook can use the comments section, and we'll answer as many questions as possible. First question is, did you speak or understand Chinese?
But we learned a few songs in Chinese because we did play with the Chinese children in our neighborhood, in our community, before the war, before we went into the camps. So we did
after.
And after.
They
that's right.
sing to their games.
They sing.
Every game that the children play, there's a song.
We'll
And to
sing
this
songs.
day, we remember a
remember
couple
some
of
of
them.
them.
And when we when we were somewhere, we sang it. Oh, we sang a couple of them for someone who was visiting here from China, and we probably did pretty well.
We did.
Yeah.
We remember.
But
but
no, we never spoke Chinese.
We only spoke German
German.
until we came to America.
Yeah, and the adults who had to go out and work had to learn some Chinese for their jobs. But we were 80% from Germany. 80% of the refugees were from Germany, and that's just the language we knew and spoke.
And the school we went to German school.
Thank you. Did you ever learn more about why your mother left? And it's something that you mentioned that you were able to meet her later on when you were adults. Did you ever speak with her about it? And can you please elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer because we met over the years a number of people who knew us in Shanghai, in Duluth, even in Minneapolis, and who knew her and who knew our story. And we, perhaps our audience is familiar with this expression. This is what we got. Better you shouldn't know, with the hand wave. Better you shouldn't know. So there was always this mystery, what in the world happened? But over time, and including conversations with Ima, we heard a range of stories that ran from our dad became an alcoholic and very violent. Well, we
can't even imagine. We don't know him that way.
Yeah, and that was part of the story we heard from her. Some people think that she may have met someone. We don't know this. Some people think that she may have met, that she and Horst fell in love, and the gentleman she eventually married, who, by the way, we adored.
Wish he could have been in our life.
Yeah. So we've heard a range of stories like that. But the thing that has made the most sense to us, we just learned, I don't know, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe, and it is the following. Even though we were not citizens of Shanghai, of China, we were not Chinese, we were required, we as refugees, to abide by Chinese law. And the law was that if a woman leaves a man, the children stay with the man, with the father. That made all the sense in the world
to us how we landed, how we wound up being with our dad.
Why Ima thought it was worth, we don't know, but she was never well. She spent a life of guilt, of anxiety, of depression.
Yeah.
She was never well, ever. And then she had early onset Alzheimer's, and her stories were very confusing and confused. She was a darling little thing. And when she was engaged, she would laugh and smile and be very happy. But the minute she was left alone, she would sit and wring her hands and speak. She spoke 7 languages that she just picked up and mix up all her languages.
And she would pace back and forth
and pace a lot.
It was very sad. Yes, she had a very sad life.
Very sad life. Well, I think they both did.
We did.
Yeah. We don't know 100% what happened. It's okay with us. We knew something happened.
And we had nearly 30 years of seeing our mother off and on, traveling back and forth, seeing her. She would come to the States and visit and see the kids and stay with both of us, and we went to see to her. And we went to see her many times, she and Horst, in Germany.
Thank you so much for sharing this. Did you ever belong to any organization specifically for Jews who lived in Shanghai?
We tried, didn't we?
We did.
We spent many years not knowing there were organizations. And when we found Sonia, I think it was she who told us about the Shanghai Highlanders, the Shanghai Highlanders, that there were groups and that there were, in fact, reunions.
Every couple of years.
Yeah, they've been to China, to Israel, to Chicago, to, so on. We did make a connection I did call the Shanghailander head, and it was at the year that they stopped the group. There wasn't, I guess, enough. But we did go to a reunion in Toronto.
And we had a
Very-
terrible experience
A
there.
very disappointing experience, which I think is worth sharing.
Sharon, sure.
Nobody could care about us less. They were totally uninterested in us because we were born in Shanghai. And
Consequently, we didn't
didn't have-
suffer like the people who came from all over Europe and countries like that, who went through all the terrible, horrendous things and wound up in Shanghai, maybe as teenagers or young
even 2
children.
years old.
Yeah, even
We-
2 years old.
We
right?
had a woman who was 2 years old when she came from, her family moved from Germany to Shanghai. And when she found out we were born there, she literally said to us, well, then you didn't have the experience, and turned her back and
Yeah.
walked away
So
from us.
we were not considered survivors, Holocaust survivors at that time. And so
quite a
we
while.
just never pursued anything further.
It's quite recent that we've been recognized as survivors, as have people who were on the run, people who were
Hiding.
hidden
Yeah.
by sometimes non-Jewish families or churches. All of us are survivors, are suffered at the hands of the Nazis as a result of what the Nazis did, but it's taken many years for that to
Be
happen.
recognized.
Thank you for sharing this. And I'm glad you mentioned this because, of course, your story is absolutely worth sharing. And this is why we're so happy to have you here to be sharing this story with our community. So, of course, we're sorry that you had that experience, but we're so grateful that you're talking about this now and that you've been able to share this history with so many people. And as a related question, why do you think that this part of Holocaust history is generally not as well known as other parts of Holocaust history?
Well, for one thing, it was many years before the Shanghai Jews were willing or able to tell their stories. And now I'm telling you things that we know from reading and talking to people. There was a tremendous amount of survivor guilt among the Shanghai Jews. And I think part of it was because they knew what was happening in Europe. They knew the horrors, and as difficult as their life may have been in Shanghai, and it was difficult, especially during the war. They felt like somehow they had, dodged the bullet, so to speak. And many people wouldn't speak about it for years and years. And now you can find many videos, and some of them you'll see us in. Videos, books, articles, programs. Now we're being recognized as Holocaust survivors, and like we are both Holocaust survivors and children of Holocaust survivors. And now we're more active also with the Holocaust. I'm a volunteer I'm on the advisory board for the Holocaust program at JFS. I am engaged in approving applications for assistance from Holocaust survivors, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them here in Los Angeles. We attend the Children of Survivors events when we can. And so there's a more of a recognition, and there's many stories now out there, but it's taken many, many years.
Thank you. A related question to what you mentioned about survivor's guilt for those who went to Shanghai. Do you know if your father or your mother actually corresponded with relatives in Europe at any point while they were still able to? And do you know anything about that?
There was one aunt, our father's sister, Dora.
Dora,
Yes. She's the only one who survived. But during the time that their families were in concentration camps, yes, our mother used to hear from a brother-in-law who apparently wasn't in the camp but knew all about what was going on. And she got terrible, terrible letters from him about how her family had suffered, how one of her nephews was used for target practice when he was 3 years old and killed that way in the camp. And she would receive mail from him like that. And of course, that didn't help much with her emotional state that she already was in while she's living in a camp, surviving in Shanghai.
Imagine, we were kids, but imagine what the adults went through to land in a country that was so different,
so foreign,
culturally, culturally, everything about landing in a country, what they went through. But there was communication. I think letters continued to arrive, and as new refugees came, there was news. Of course, no more came after once the war started in 41. But things were already going on, and there was communication, and they knew what was happening in Europe. Not just our parents, many of the refugees.
You. Going back to your school a little bit, do you remember the name of the school that you went to?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were two schools. One was called the Jewish School, which was the Kaduri family. There were families in Shanghai before all this happened. Most of them were in the import-export business, but families like the Sassoons, the hair product family, very wealthy family. The Kaduris were very wealthy families, and they did, to their credit, try and help the refugees in the ghetto to the extent that they could, which wasn't very much. But the Kaduri family built a school, and that's the school that we went
attended.
To. It was called the Jewish Shanghai Jewish School or something like that. And then there was another school, which you might say was a little like a private school, a little more upscale, so that there were kids in there who could afford to go there, but that wasn't us.
Thank you. And so you learned English at these schools at all, or what? You learned English when you came to the United States then?
Yeah, we learned. We arrived in April
of 1948,
and they sent us to summer school to pretty much learn English, which we were pretty smart kids. We picked up, and we were very highly motivated. All we wanted to do was lose our accents so that we sounded like other kids.
That's right. Well, by fall, when school started again, we were able to communicate. We would kind of mix up our sentences, partly German, partly English, but we managed quite well, and it didn't take us long. And we did very, very well in school, because the school in Shanghai was much harder. We were way ahead in a lot of things except English.
Yeah, and that was pretty much our experience throughout school. We did well in school.
When you were in school in the United States, did you ever talk to your friends in school about where you were born or anything about your background, and how did they react?
At first, we held back a little bit, because people would say, "Oh, I was born up in the Iron Range, up where Bobby Dylan was born," that kind of thing, in Minnesota. And once we would mention, or once we were asked, where were you born? And we said, Shanghai, China, it was all over for the rest of the kids.
Yeah.
So we soon learned, then all the focus was on us, and that wasn't exactly a good thing. But,
However, the school administrators, the school that we were in, the elementary school, and they put us back a year, by the way, because we didn't speak English. But we should have been in third grade, but they put us in second grade because of language, which later, junior high school, they skipped us. We
From
skipped
seventh
eighth
to-
grade. Yeah. But anyway, they were very interested in our story. We were the only Jewish kids in the school. It was a very integrated neighborhood, but we were used to seeing, people from different ethnicities and colors. In Shanghai, it was a very metropolitan city always. And we were the only Jewish kids. And they actually talked us in elementary school into talking to the school, entire school, about our Jewish holidays.
At assemblies.
At assemblies, about every Jewish holiday, they would have us get up and talk about the holiday, and then a little bit about our story of being born in Shanghai. It's very interesting. And so in elementary school, yes, you were talking about, but not since.
No.
Except at dinner parties and so forth, where people said it, and where are you from? And you say, how much time do you have?
Yeah.
Because once you say Shanghai, then that's where the conversation goes. We often just say we're from Minnesota.
Thank you for sharing. Do you remember the name of the ship that you came here on?
Oh, we know it. No, not offhand.
no.
We could look it up. We have it in our papers.
We do.
In our claims conference papers.
We would have to look
We
that
would
up.
have to look
Michael.
that up.
Yeah. Mhm.
It's okay, thank you. One of our viewers says, your outlook and perspective is incredibly inspiring. What do you attribute that understanding and compassion to, given the hardships you endured? And what advice do you have for those of us whose relatives perished, but whose trauma remains in the offspring?
Oh, goodness. That's a tough question, isn't it? Want to take a crack?
Well, first and foremost, we always had each other. We were not alone like thousands and
Like so
thousands
many
of people were, like so many others were. And we were always happy to be together. We found support and safety in just having each other as a start.
Yeah.
And we seem to have been born with an optimistic outlook in general, I think.
I think so too. It's almost a cop out to say we were born this way, but we always have been this way. Then not to say we haven't suffered and endured and been through things, but I think that we believe in looking forward. I think that we've always been very engaged in life, in the community, in school, with our families. I think engagement is what people need. Socialization, we've always been very social, and that probably stems from just get out of the house and do something with other people. We've had a lot of support and encouragement from others. So, for example, at the very rare times that our dad and stepmother would come to a parent-teacher event I remember in either junior high school or high school, and I remember standing there with them and the teacher saying, "You must really be proud of your girls. They're so smart and they do so well." We were always straight A students. They work so hard and they're so nice to be blah blah, and and our stepmother said, well, you don't really know them. They're total useless kids. And, I mean, it was that kind of thing. So as long as we were away from home, which doesn't help really address your question other than to say support has to come from somewhere, whether it's in the home, or outside. Kids as children, for sure, need to be supported and encouraged
from somewhere.
From somewhere.
And we always had that once we were outside of the home,
Outside of-
and we had that to look forward to. Yes, tomorrow we go to school.
We go back to
Go back to school,
Back to
and
school.
that was throughout our entire through high school. And once we left home, we were totally capable, independent individuals that didn't come from our household. It's just something we both had. It was something to look forward to. Wait till we get out there on our own.
We also really, how can I say this? We're driven to do well. Now that comes partly from fear, because if we didn't do well, we were afraid to go home. We got a B once in gym, in PE. I remember we walked around the block for 45 minutes because we knew what was going to happen to us because of that B in gym. So we had to do well. We literally had to do well. So I'm not saying, make your kids do well by instilling fear, but I think to a certain extent, that has driven us. And it took me a long time being in college to say, you don't have to get an A. But I had that voice in me, you have to get an A, you have to get an A, you have to get an A.
Yeah. It wasn't just that fear brought to us, but it was a long time when someone would approach us that we didn't go like this.
Yeah,
Okay,
we had that abused children thing that happens to kids who are physically abused, that you take a protective stance. And it was a teacher, one of our teachers, who noticed it.
That's right.
And talked to us about it. And not that anything was ever done, but being aware of it helped us, not
to
do
overcome
it,
yes.
to overcome it, and to give us confidence.
And now we approach people like this. Come on in here.
So we feel very blessed.
Yeah.
But surely being together and being there for each other, and we're still that way. We're very close. We're very lucky. We're very fortunate.
Thank you so much for sharing. And just to conclude, I know you mentioned this a little bit earlier. What would you like your audience to take away from learning your story this afternoon?
Well, here's something that I like to say. I taught at USC for many, many years, and always in gerontology and in social work. And I always told my students, when you see an older person, ask them about themselves. If people have had lives that are unimaginable, and there's so much to learn. And I say this to everybody, whatever age you are, to look, you couldn't tell. You really need to talk to others and to find out about them and their lives. It doesn't have to be, war stories. It can be, people are so interesting. People are so resourceful. People have done the most amazing things, and that you can't tell them by just, meeting them.
That's right.
So ask people about themselves. Listen to their, to their stories.
And I like to say, if you have the opportunity, be it a friend, be it someone in your family that's older, perhaps in a nursing home or someplace living by themselves, maybe you can give them something to look forward to. Maybe you can tell them, I'll come and visit you next week, because being able to look forward to something is what keeps you going. Otherwise, you're just there all alone.
I think that, we believe in hope. And we always think something's wonderful is going to happen
Something
sometime
fun and
tomorrow,
great. That's
this
right.
afternoon,
That's right.
next year.
Mhm.
And it is a positive outlook. I believe that that helps you get through. Do we dare say this too shall pass? But it's been our experience.
That's right.
That things change all the time, and change can bring hope. In the bleakest times, there's hope for better times. And surround yourself with optimistic people,
Yes.
with happy people. Pick up the banjo. You have to smile when you're playing the banjo.
That's right.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. We appreciate it so much, and we're so honored to have you here to be sharing your story with us in our community, and for you to have been able to teach so many people about what you and your family experienced. We're just so glad to have you as a part of our community, and we want to thank you so much. We have one comment here from a viewer whose family was in Shanghai. She says, "I'm so blessed to hear your story. Thank you for sharing your light and experience with us. I'm so inspired and appreciate your insights and experience. It's very healing for those of us who too have indirectly suffered because of our Holocaust surviving family members."
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for
Thank
that. It's very meaningful to us. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. We look forward to having you at the museum for future programs and to have you speak again. Thank you so much to our audience. We hope to have you tune in next Thursday for our weekly Survivor Talk. And again, please, everybody who has not yet seen our Shanghai exhibit, it is here at the museum through August 28th. So we hope you can see it then. Thank you so much again to Gitta and Monika, and thank you everyone for listening. Thank you.